You are the color of invisibility, Elara, a useful shade of beige. Do try to blend with the wallpaper." Those were my stepmother's parting words, delivered with a smile as sweet and sharp as crystallized poison, before she swept into the ballroom, a vision in emerald silk, with my stepsister Clara, a shimmering diamond on her arm. I, of course, was left behind in the alcove, tucked between a drooping fern and a tapestry depicting a forgotten battle. It was my designated place for the evening, my cage camouflaged by velvet curtains. This was the annual Winter Solstice Ball, the crowning jewel of the season, and for the third year running, my role was that of a ghost. My father, a man whose spine had long ago dissolved in the acid of his second wife's ambition, had simply nodded when Beatrice decreed it. "Elara is of a retiring nature," he had murmured, not meeting my eyes. "Best she isn't overwhelmed." Overwhelmed. The word was a lie. I was being hidden. My plainness, my quietude, my very existence was an inconvenient smudge on the perfect portrait of their family. Clara was the masterpiece, destined for a brilliant match. I was the preparatory sketch, to be stored in a dark room and forgotten. I wore a dress the color of dishwater, a drab gray that Beatrice had chosen with meticulous care. It was designed not to be worn, but to disappear into. I watched the swirl of the party through a gap in the heavy drapery. Jewels glittered like captured stars, laughter pealed through the air like the ringing of 1,000 tiny bells, and the orchestra wove a tapestry of sound that felt a world away from my silent corner. I felt a familiar ache settle in my chest, a hollow weight I had carried for so long it had become a part of my anatomy. It was the ache of being unseen, unheard, unvalued. I was a footnote in the story of my own life, an appendix deemed unnecessary. I had long since given up on hope. Hope was a fragile, winged thing, and my home was a place with no open windows. My only escape was in the library, in the silent company of books on architecture and history. There, I could trace the lines of ancient cathedrals, marvel at the mathematical precision of a Roman aqueduct, and lose myself in the grand designs of minds long dead. Those architects had not been invisible. They had built legacies of stone and glass that defied time. They had left their mark. My own mark was so faint, I sometimes wondered if I would leave an impression even on the cushion of the chair I occupied. The ballroom doors opened again, admitting a draft of cold night air that made the candle flames dance. A hush, sudden and profound, fell over the chattering crowd. It was a silence of a different quality, not of reverence, but of shock and awe. I parted the curtain a fraction more. Standing in the doorway, framed by the gilded arch, was a man who seemed to suck all the light and air in the room toward himself. He was tall, dressed in immaculate, unadorned black that made the surrounding finery look gaudy. His face was severe, carved from granite, with dark eyes that swept the room with an unnerving stillness. I did not need the frantic whispers that erupted like sparks to know who he was. Duke Alistair Vance, the Duke of Blackwood, a man of immense wealth, ancient lineage, and terrifying power. He was a recluse, a phantom who rarely graced London society, preferring the solitude of his vast, remote estate. Stories clung to him like mist, that he was cruel, that he was haunted by the death of his younger brother years ago, that his heart was a fortress of ice. He was the season's great unattainable prize, a man no ambitious mother dared to openly court for fear of his legendary disdain. And he was here. My stepmother, Beatrice, practically vibrated with ambition. I saw her hand tighten on Clara's arm, her eyes alight with a predatory gleam. She began to move through the crowd, a galleon in full sail, charting a course directly for the Duke. But he did not seem to notice. His gaze was slow, methodical, sweeping over the glittering assembly with an expression that bordered on contempt. He dismissed the hopeful smiles, the fluttering fans, the presented daughters, his eyes moving past them as if they were nothing more than decorative furniture. And then, his gaze stopped. It froze. My breath caught in my throat as I realized, with a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror, that he was looking directly at my hiding place. It was impossible. The alcove was deep in shadow, deliberately obscured, yet his eyes, dark and piercing, found the gap in the curtains and held. He was not looking at the tapestry. He was looking at me. For a long moment, the world seemed to shrink to the space between us. The music faded, the chatter disappeared. There was only the unnerving intensity of his stare. I felt pinned, a moth under glass. I was certain he could see everything: the cheap fabric of my dress, the tremor in my hands, the slow, painful beat of my worthless heart. I saw Beatrice falter in her advance, a flicker of confusion crossing her face as she followed his line of sight. She saw him looking toward the alcove and dismissed it, assuming he was admiring the tapestry. Then he moved. He did not wait to be approached. He did not acknowledge the host or the sea of parted guests. He walked. With a purpose that was both silent and absolute, he crossed the polished floor, his path a straight, undeniable line. He ignored my stunned father, bypassed my gaping stepmother, and a slack-jawed Clara. He walked directly to my alcove. The entire ballroom held its breath, watching this bizarre, inexplicable pilgrimage. He stopped just before the velvet curtain, his shadow falling over me. I shrank back, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He reached out a gloved hand and, with a single deliberate movement, pulled the curtain aside. The full light of the ballroom flooded my small prison, exposing me to 100 pairs of staring eyes. I felt naked, flayed open by their collective gaze. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable. I expected a sneer, a look of pity, or worse, cruel amusement. I saw none of it. I saw only a profound and unsettling stillness. "Miss Ashworth," he said. His voice was low, a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate in the very air around us. "I believe this is our dance." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered with an authority that allowed for no argument. I could not speak. My throat was a knot of panic. Around us, a wave of whispers crested and broke. My stepmother's face was a mask of disbelief, her perfect smile frozen in a rictus of horror. She saw her grand plans, her carefully constructed evening, being dismantled by this man's incomprehensible whim. The Duke extended his hand. It was a command. Slowly, as if moving through water, I placed my trembling fingers in his. His grip was firm, surprisingly warm. He drew me out of the shadows and into the blazing center of the room. He led me toward the dance floor, the crowd parting before us like the Red Sea. He nodded once to the orchestra leader, who immediately struck up a waltz. And then he pulled me into his arms, and we were dancing. I was a clumsy dancer, unpracticed and terrified. I expected to stumble, to disgrace myself utterly. But he was an impeccable lead, guiding me with a subtle pressure at my waist, his movements so confident and precise that I had no choice but to follow. We moved in silence. I kept my eyes fixed on the knot of his cravat, unable to meet his gaze. I could feel the heat of 1,000 eyes on my back, could hear the furious speculation. Why her? The plain one. The invisible one. What game was the Duke of Blackwood playing? I asked myself the same questions. This had to be a joke, a cruel and public spectacle designed for his own amusement, or perhaps it was a calculated slight against my stepmother, a way to disrupt her social maneuvering. Pity was the kindest explanation, and it was the most humiliating. I would rather be ignored than pitied. The waltz felt like an eternity and a fleeting second all at once. When the music finally ended, he did not release me immediately. "Thank you, Miss Ashworth," he said, his voice still low and even. He then escorted me not back to my alcove, but to a small, unoccupied seating area near the French doors, in full view of everyone. He procured 2 glasses of lemonade from a passing footman, handed one to me, and sat in the chair beside me. He did not leave. He stayed. The message was unmistakable. He had claimed me, for this moment, as his chosen companion. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of confusion. He spoke little, asking only a few perfunctory questions about the music, the season, but his presence at my side was a shield and a spotlight. No one dared approach. My family watched from across the room, their expressions a warring storm of fury, bewilderment, and for the first time from Clara, a flicker of something I could not name. When the time came for him to depart, he bowed over my hand. "I will call on you tomorrow, Miss Ashworth, at 2. And then he was gone, leaving a maelstrom in his wake. The carriage ride home was a silent, simmering inferno. Beatrice's rage was a palpable thing, a heat that filled the small space. She did not speak to me until we were in the entrance hall of our house. "I do not know what contemptible trick you played," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, "but it will end. You will not ruin this family with your pathetic little schemes. You will make your excuses tomorrow. You are unwell. You are indisposed. You will not see him." She did not wait for a reply, but swept up the stairs, a queen whose coronation had been inexplicably spoiled. My father simply looked at the floor, a portrait of ineffectual sorrow. The next day, I was a prisoner in my own room. Beatrice had instructed the staff that I was not to be disturbed. I sat by the window, watching the clock on the mantelpiece, my mind a tempest of fear and a tiny, treacherous spark of curiosity. Why? Why would a man like the Duke of Blackwood single out someone like me? I was under no illusions. I was not beautiful. I was not charming. I had no dowry to speak of, as Beatrice constantly reminded me. The only logical conclusion was that he was toying with me and with my family for some inscrutable purpose of his own. At precisely 2 o'clock, the knocker sounded. I heard the butler's surprised voice, then the deeper tones of the Duke. I held my breath. I heard my stepmother's saccharine greeting, the honeyed explanation of my sudden and severe headache. I waited for the sound of his departure. Instead, I heard his voice, calm and unyielding. "I am sorry to hear of her ailment. Nevertheless, I will wait. I have a matter of some importance to discuss with her." There was a long silence. The Duke of Blackwood was not a man one simply turned away. He was a force of nature, and my stepmother, for all her iron will, was merely a house built in its path. Minutes later, a flustered maid knocked on my door. "His Grace the Duke is in the library, miss. Lady Beatrice says you are to go down." Her eyes were wide with disbelief. My hands shook as I smoothed my drab morning dress. I walked down the stairs as if to my own execution. The library, my only sanctuary, felt alien with him in it. He was standing by the window, looking out at the bleak winter garden. He turned as I entered. "Miss Ashworth," he said, his expression as unreadable as ever. "Please sit." I sat on the edge of a chair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. My stepmother's threats echoed in my ears. "Your Grace," I began, my voice a mere thread, "I must apologize for any misunderstanding. Last night was unexpected. I am not accustomed to such attention." "There was no misunderstanding," he said simply. He walked over to the bookshelves, his long fingers trailing along the leather spines. He stopped at the section on architecture. 3 years ago, at the exhibition at Somerset House, I overheard a young woman arguing with her father about the structural integrity of Wren's original designs for St. Paul's. She spoke of tensile strength and the limitations of Portland stone. She pointed out that the dome, as beautiful as it is a masterpiece of illusion, not engineering. Her father told her to be quiet, that such topics were not for young ladies. He turned to look at me, his dark eyes pinning me in place. "That young woman was you." The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. I remembered that day, the brief, passionate flash of intellectual excitement and the swift, humiliating dismissal from my father. I had been so ashamed, I had never spoken of it again. You remember that?" I whispered. "I remember everything that is of interest," he replied, "and that was of interest. Intelligence is a rarity, Miss Ashworth. Authenticity, even more so. I have spent years surrounded by the shallow and the calculating. It has made me discerning." He picked up a heavy book from the shelf, a detailed treatise on Palladian villas. "I find I have little time for artifice." I was speechless. His interest was not a whim. It was not pity. It was based on a single forgotten moment when I had allowed my true self to be seen. He had seen me, truly seen me, when even my own father had looked away. The thought was so overwhelming, so terrifyingly hopeful, that I felt dizzy. I braced myself for the other shoe to drop, for the cruel punchline. It did not come. Instead, he placed the book on the table between us. "I find myself in need of a consultant," he said, his tone shifting to one of business. "My library at Blackwood Manor is in need of reorganization. It is a chaotic mess of my family's collections over 3 centuries. I require someone with a methodical mind and a knowledge of history to assist in creating a new cataloging system. The work would be extensive, You would, of course, be compensated for your time. It was a preposterous, transparent excuse, and yet it was also a lifeline. It was a reason for us to meet, a respectable framework for an association that society and my stepmother would have no choice but to accept. It was an offer of work, of purpose, and it was an invitation into his world. I would be honored, Your Grace, I managed to say. Alistair, he corrected me gently. My name is Alistair. Over the next few weeks, a new rhythm established itself. 3 times a week, the Duke's carriage would arrive to convey me to his London residence, a formidable stone mansion that was more fortress than home. We would spend hours in his library, a magnificent 2-story room paneled in dark wood and smelling of old paper and beeswax. At first, I was timid, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the task and his silent, watchful presence. The housekeeper, a stern-faced but kind-eyed woman named Mistress Gable, would bring us tea and small cakes, her initial formality slowly softening into a quiet, approving warmth. Alistair rarely spoke while we worked. He would sit in a worn leather armchair, reading or reviewing documents, while I stood on ladders poring over dusty tomes. But I was always aware of him. His stillness was not empty. It was charged, observant. Sometimes I would look up and find his eyes on me, his expression thoughtful. He did not compliment me or offer empty flattery. His validation was of a different kind. When I discovered a rare, mislabeled folio of architectural drawings by Inigo Jones, his only comment was a low, "I thought that might be in here." But the look in his eyes was one of profound satisfaction, a meeting of minds that was more thrilling than any pretty compliment. We began to talk, not about the weather or social gossip, but about things that mattered. We argued about the merits of Gothic versus neoclassical design. He told me about his travels in Italy, describing the way the light fell on the Florentine Duomo at dawn. I spoke of my dreams of seeing the great libraries of the world, of walking through buildings that had stood for 1,000 years. In his company, the parts of myself I had been taught to hide, my intellect, my passion, my opinions, were not just tolerated, they were sought. The timid, hesitant girl who had entered his library began to fade, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone with a voice. One afternoon, as a cold rain lashed against the windows, we found a small leather-bound journal tucked inside a larger book. It was a diary belonging to his great-grandmother. As I carefully turned the fragile pages, I read aloud a passage about her grief over the loss of a child. I glanced up at Alistair and saw that the severe mask had fallen away. His face was etched with a raw, unguarded pain. "My brother Thomas," he said, his voice rough. "He died when he was 16. A fall from a horse. It was my fault. I gave him the stallion. It was too spirited for him. I should have known." He looked away, out at the rain-streaked glass. My parents never recovered. The house, it became a museum of grief. That is why I left. Why I prefer solitude. Silence is less accusing. It was the first time he had spoken of his past, of the wound that festered beneath his cold exterior. My heart ached for him, for the boy who had shouldered a man's burden of guilt. Instinctively, I reached out and placed my hand over his on the table. It was a small, impulsive gesture, a breach of all propriety. He stiffened for a second, then turned his hand over and laced his fingers through mine. His skin was warm, his grip strong. We sat there in silence as the rain fell, a current of understanding passing between us that was deeper than any words. In that moment, he was not the formidable Duke of Blackwood, and I was not the invisible Elara Ashworth. We were just 2 lonely souls finding a fragile sanctuary in a dusty library. That touch, brief as it was, changed everything. The careful distance we had maintained was gone, replaced by a subtle but undeniable intimacy. A shared glance across the room held a new weight. The accidental brush of our hands as we reached for the same book sent a jolt through me. I was falling in love with him, and the realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. I, who had never expected to be noticed, was being cherished. I, who had been told I was worthless, was being valued by the one man whose opinion was beginning to mean more to me than life itself. Hope, that fragile, winged thing I had long ago dismissed, had found a way into my heart and was building a nest. But such a change could not go unnoticed. My stepmother had been forced to tolerate our arrangement, but she watched my weekly departures with a look of curdled fury. She saw her prize, the Duke, being stolen away not by her beautiful, accomplished Clara, but by me, the gray mouse she had intended to sweep into a corner. Her initial disbelief had hardened into a dangerous resentment. She could not comprehend it. In her world, value was measured in beauty, connections, and wealth. That the Duke might value something else, something in me, was an affront to her entire worldview. Her attack, when it came, was swift and cruel. One morning, I came down to breakfast to find my father and stepmother in the midst of a hushed, urgent conversation. Beatrice looked up at me, her face a mask of false sympathy. "Elara, my dear," she said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness, "we have the most wonderful news. Lord Grumbridge has made an offer for your hand." The name was a shock of cold water. Lord Grumbridge was a lecherous old viscount, nearly 3 times my age, infamous for his gout and his cruelty to his staff. He was a toad of a man whom Beatrice had been flattering for months, hoping to secure a loan. "He has been so taken with your quiet modesty," she continued, her eyes glittering. "We have, of course, accepted on your behalf. The wedding will be in a fortnight, a simple affair, naturally." She was selling me. She was selling me to a vile old man to get rid of me, to sever my connection to the Duke, and to line her own pockets. I looked at my father, pleading with my eyes. He just stared into his coffee cup, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "It is a good match, Elara," he mumbled, "a secure future." "No," I said, the word a small foreign sound in my own throat. Beatrice's smile vanished. "What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, a flicker of the confidence Alistair had given me igniting within my chest. "I will not marry him." "You will do as you are told," she snapped, her mask of civility falling away to reveal the tyrant beneath. "You are an ungrateful, scheming little creature. Do you think I don't see what you are doing? Flattering the Duke, filling his head with nonsense. He is toying with you, you little fool. He will discard you the moment he is bored, and you will have ruined everything for Clara, for all of us. This marriage is happening. I will not have you stand in the way of this family's future." Before I could answer, the butler entered, carrying a letter on a silver tray. It was addressed to me in Alistair's precise, familiar hand. My heart leaped, but Beatrice snatched it from the tray before I could move. "I will take that," she said, her eyes narrowing. She broke the seal and read, her expression shifting from anger to triumphant cruelty. She let out a short, ugly laugh. "Well, well, it seems His Grace is not as besotted as you believed." She thrust the letter at me. It was a curt formal note, informing me that my services at his library were no longer required and that he would not be calling on me again. It was signed simply, Blackwood. It was cold, dismissive, and utterly final. It was not his handwriting. It was a forgery, and a clumsy one at that. But the second letter, the one tucked inside it, was real. It was from Alistair, but it was addressed to my stepmother. I scanned the lines, my blood turning to ice. It was a response to a letter she had apparently sent him. "I thank you for your candor regarding your stepdaughter's delicate mental state," it read. "Your concerns for her flights of fancy and her tendency toward obsession are noted. Under the circumstances, it is best I discontinue our association." The world tilted on its axis. She had written to him, filled his head with lies about me being mentally unstable, a desperate spinster clinging to a fantasy. She had painted me as pathetic and mad, and he had believed her. The fragile nest of hope in my heart was torn to shreds. Of course he would believe her. She was a respected lady of society. I was a nobody. He had seen my intelligence, yes, but he had not seen the depths of her depravity. I had been a fool to think he was different. They were all the same. I was invisible, and when I was finally seen, it was only through the distorted lens of another's malice. I felt the fight drain out of me, replaced by a vast gray emptiness. Beatrice was right, I was a fool. The wedding is in 2 weeks, she said, her voice filled with victory. You will start behaving like the dutiful daughter you are meant to be. I did not answer. I turned and walked from the room, each step an agony. I had lost. The following days were a living nightmare. I was confined to the house, watched constantly. The arrangements for my marriage to Lord Grumbridge proceeded at a dizzying pace. Dressmakers came and went, their cheerful chatter about lace and silk a grotesque counterpoint to my silent despair. I felt myself disappearing again, fading back into that useful shade of beige, my brief season of color, nothing but a painful memory. Clara tried to speak to me once, her pretty face clouded with a rare expression of concern. "Elara, are you truly well?" she asked. I saw my stepmother's lies reflected in her eyes and turned away without a word. A week before the wedding, a package arrived. It was delivered by one of the Duke's footmen, with strict instructions that it be given directly to me. Beatrice tried to intercept it, but the footman was immovable, his loyalty to his master absolute. Inside the box was a simple leather-bound book, a new one. Tucked inside was a note in Alistair's true hand. "The East Wing requires a fresh eye. Your work is not yet complete. A carriage will be waiting at the end of the lane at midnight tomorrow. Be in it." A single sentence, a command, not a question. It was not an apology, not an explanation, but it was everything. It was a rope thrown into the abyss. He had not believed her. He had been playing a longer game, a dangerous, terrifying wave of hope, stronger than any I had felt before, crashed over me. He was giving me a choice, to remain in my cage or to risk everything on a midnight flight. There was no choice at all. The next night, I waited until the house was silent and still. I dressed in my plainest traveling clothes, a small bag clutched in my hand containing nothing but the book he had sent. Slipping out of the house was surprisingly easy. No one expected the beige girl to be capable of rebellion. The winter air was bitingly cold, the moon a sliver of ice in a black sky. As promised, a dark, unmarked carriage was waiting at the end of the lane. The door swung open as I approached. I climbed inside, my heart pounding, and the carriage lurched into motion, carrying me away from the only home I had ever known and into an unknown future. We traveled through the night. I did not know our destination. I trusted him. As dawn broke, painting the frosted fields in shades of rose and gray, we arrived at the gates of a vast estate, Blackwood Manor. It was an imposing structure of dark stone, a place of severe Gothic beauty, more castle than house. It looked exactly as I had imagined it would. Mistress Gable was waiting for me at the door, her usual stern expression softened by a look of profound relief. She led me to a warm, comfortable room. "His Grace will see you in the great hall when you are ready," she said, her voice gentle. I found him standing before a cavernous fireplace where a log fire blazed, his back to me. He turned as I entered. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. The exhaustion, the fear, the desperate hope of the past weeks were a chasm between us. "You came," he said, his voice quiet. "You asked me to," I replied. "Your stepmother is a formidable liar," he stated, walking toward a large oak table. On it were spread a number of documents. "She wrote to me, as you know, a masterful performance of a concerned mother, worried for her fragile, delusional stepdaughter." "And you believed her," I said, the words tasting of ash. "No," he said, his eyes meeting mine, dark and intense. "I did not. I've spent my life navigating the treachery of the London elite. I know the scent of a lie, but her letter gave me an opportunity. It made her believe she had won. It made her careless." He gestured to the papers on the table. "While she was busy arranging your marriage, I had my solicitors look into your family's finances, specifically into the trust your mother left for you, the one your father and stepmother told you was depleted by bad investments." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "It was not depleted, Elara. It was stolen, systematically for the last 10 years, by your stepmother. She has been funding her ambitions, Clara's gowns, this entire season with your inheritance. The marriage to Grumbridge was her final move. She was not just getting rid of you. She was acquiring his funds to cover the last of her debts." The truth of it settled over me, cold and heavy. All those years of being told I was a burden, that I was costing them a fortune. All of it had been a lie, a cruel inversion of the truth. I had been the one funding their gilded life, and they had made me thank them for the scraps from my own table. "This morning," Alistair continued, his voice hard as iron, "I sent a carriage to your home. It contained my solicitor, and it contained your father, your stepmother, and your stepsister. They believe they are here to finalize the marriage contract with Lord Grumbridge, whom I have also invited. They are waiting in the drawing room." He looked at me, his gaze softening slightly. "She took your voice for years, Elara. I thought it was time you had the opportunity to use it." He led me to the drawing room. The doors were immense, carved from dark oak. As we stood before them, my courage wavered. I was terrified. She had been the architect of my misery for so long. To face her felt like facing a Gorgon. Alistair must have sensed my fear. He took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "I am with you," he murmured. "You are not invisible anymore." He opened the doors. The scene within was perfectly arranged. Beatrice and my father sat on a brocade sofa looking smug. Clara stood by the window, looking anxious, and in a large armchair by the fire, looking bewildered and impatient, was the odious Lord Grumbridge. They all looked up as we entered. Beatrice's face went white with shock when she saw me at the Duke's side. "What is the meaning of this? Elara, what are you doing here?" Alistair ignored her, his voice cutting through the room like a shard of ice. "Lord Grumbridge, thank you for coming. I believe there has been a misunderstanding. Miss Ashworth will not be marrying you. Not now, not ever." Grumbridge sputtered, his face turning a blotchy purple. "What? The contract is agreed." "The contract," Alistair said calmly, "was predicated on a dowry which, it turns out, does not belong to the woman who offered it." He turned his cold gaze on Beatrice. "Lady Ashworth, my solicitors have spent the last week reviewing your accounts. The results are illuminating." He laid a ledger on the table. "They trace, with remarkable clarity, the systematic embezzlement of Miss Elara Ashworth's inheritance, beginning 10 years ago." My father gasped, looking at his wife in horror. "Beatrice? What is he talking about?" Beatrice leaped to her feet, her composure finally shattering. "Lies! This is a trick! That wretched girl has poisoned you against us with her fantasies." And then I found my voice. It rose from a deep forgotten place within me, clear and strong. "No, stepmother, the fantasies were yours. The fantasy that I was worthless, the fantasy that I was a burden, the fantasy that you could erase me." I stepped forward, the fear gone, replaced by a cold, cleansing anger. "You told me I was the color of invisibility, but you were the one who was blind. You looked at me and saw nothing of value because you have no value of your own. Your entire life is a performance, built on stolen money and calculated cruelty." I turned to my father. "And you? You stood by and watched. You let her dim every light inside me because you were too weak to stand up to her. You chose a quiet life over your own daughter's happiness. I will never forgive you for that." I looked at Clara, who was weeping silently by the window. "You were never cruel, Clara, but you were complacent. You lived in the sun and never once thought to ask why I was always kept in the shadows." Finally, I faced Beatrice again. She was staring at me, her mouth agape, her face a ruin of her former beauty. She had been defeated, not by the Duke's power, but by the truth. "You will not sell me," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "You will not hide me, and you will never, ever speak to me again. You are nothing to me." Alistair stepped forward. "My solicitor has the full evidence, Lady Ashworth. You have two choices. You can return every last penny to Elara, leave London, and live out your days in quiet disgrace. Or I can present this evidence to the authorities. Fraud and theft carry rather severe penalties." He looked at my ashen-faced father. "The choice, Lord Ashworth, is yours, your wife, or what little remains of your family's honor." My father, for the first time in a decade, made a decision. He looked at his weeping wife, then at me, and in his eyes I saw a universe of regret. "We will repay the money," he whispered, his voice broken. Lord Grumbridge, realizing he had been duped, stormed out of the room, muttering about lawsuits and insults. The battle was over. Later that evening, Alistair and I stood on a windswept stone balcony, overlooking the snow-covered grounds of Blackwood. The air was cold and clean. The storm inside me had finally passed, leaving a profound and peaceful quiet. "She will be gone by tomorrow," he said. "Your father has agreed to everything. The money will be restored." "It was never about the money," I said, looking out at the endless white landscape. "It was about being heard." I turned to him. Thank you, Alistair. You gave me back my voice. I did nothing, he said, his expression serious. Your voice was always there. You simply needed a quiet place to hear it yourself. He stepped closer, taking my hands in his. They were warm, enveloping. Elara, I have lived my life in a fortress of my own making. I preferred the silence because the world outside was loud and empty. But you are not empty. Your mind, your heart, they are the most fascinating, most intricate structures I have ever had the privilege to study. I do not wish to continue my life without you. He looked down at me, his severe face transformed by an emotion I had only dreamed of seeing there. I am not asking to rescue you. You have done that yourself. I am asking to be your partner, to build a life with you, to see you and be seen by you every day. Elara Ashworth, will you marry me? Tears streamed down my face, not of sorrow, but of a joy so vast it felt like it could shatter me. Yes, I whispered. Yes. He leaned down, and his lips met mine. The kiss was not a wild, passionate inferno. It was something better. It was the end of a very long winter. It was the feeling of coming home. 1 year later, I stood in the great library of Blackwood Manor. It was our library now. The chaotic mess was gone, replaced by a system of our own design, every book perfectly placed. Sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. A large table was covered in architectural plans, our latest project, the restoration of the abandoned East Wing into a conservatory. Alistair came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. He was smiling, a true, easy smile that I now saw every day. What do you think, Your Grace? He murmured into my ear, using the formal title as a private joke between us. I leaned back against him, my hand covering his. I think, my dear Duke, I replied, my voice filled with a quiet, unshakable happiness, that the foundation is sound. It just needs a little light. I looked around the room, at the endless rows of books, at the man I loved, at the life we were building together. I was no longer a ghost in a hidden alcove, no longer a footnote in someone else's story. I was seen. I was loved. And for the first time in my life, I was finally, completely home.